And now moving on, I'm happy that I'm moderator, not a panelist after this speech. As you know, that topic of our next panel discussion is about rapid pace of digitization, what needs to be done, what are the things we wanted to cover all that. And I was thinking that we'll have to explain what is digitization and digitalization. And now the way Dr. Sanjay Kumar has given one more step beyond that, digital transformation. Now, I think the only point we can debate about is that should it be digitization with S or digitization with Z? Nothing much is left after that. So just to set the ball rolling, what I'll say is that what we were thinking for digitalization was that how to switch from traditional paper-based labor-intensive processes to more automated digital processes, which he has explained it very well. And I think in today's environment, if I look at this is one thing which ticks all the boxes. It reduces the cost, it reduces the risk, it reduces the chances of fraud, etc. It basically helps you foresee, do better data analysis and the things. And finally, top of it, cherry on the top, basically, it's also environmental friendly. Environmental sustainable growth we are all talking about. This is something which touches all the things, but still, I think a lot more needs to be done on this. A lot more discussion is required. For that, I would like to invite the eminent panelists today, which I'll start with Mr. Vivek Gupta, Senior VP, Head Trade and Supply Chain from Axis Bank. Vivek has got 25 years of experience in trade and supply, worked with various multinational banks, including Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan Chase, HSBC, and Barclays. And he has been the founding member for one of the fintech company based out of Singapore, Capital and Credit Risk Manager. The fund company was sponsored or supported by MAS, and they are tech-assisted financial advisory firm. So we have got somebody who has got the banking experience, who has got the fintech exposure also. And I must add that he is a graduate from BITS Ranchi and I am Bangalore alumni. Welcome, Vivek.
So much.
So next, I would like to invite is Srihari, who is founder and CEO from Cargo Exchange India. And this is a logistic intelligence platform which drives value through digitization and optimization. These are the things which we are all talking about, we are all looking at today. And incidentally, it won't be out of place to mention that his was the firm which developed the oxygen digital tracking system during the COVID crisis. So they are working very closely with the government of India, and they are basically doing extensive business development in driving offerings around blockchain, mobility, digital commerce, artificial intelligence. Should we say artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence? Both. Augmented intelligence and machine learning. I don't want to say artificial because we have got enough intelligence over here. We don't need artificial. We'll say the augmented intelligence. So welcome, Srihari. Happy to have you here. The next, I would like to invite again another seasoned banker, Mr. Sanjay Kumar, product head structured trade from ICICI. He has got cross-functional experience across several senior level assignments. He is the product head of structured trade and transaction banking, managing structural trade he has had experience of managing structured trade at overseas branches, including the inland trade portfolios as well. And one thing I must add that he has got the passion for technology, passion for trade solutions, and pioneered several industry firsts. And incidentally, the latest one on his CV, which you may not be knowing, he's also the vice chair of ICC India Trade Digitization Working Group. Welcome, Sanjay. The next one, I would like to invite Rajiv Warrior, Executive Director, Global Trade Head for India, South Asia, and Emerging Asian Economies from JP Morgan. Rajiv is responsible for developing and managing strategy for trade finance business, over 17 years of experience in the industry, and 12 years with JP Morgan, and before that, 7 years with Citi. So we have got enough banking talent over here. And just to complement that, next I would like to invite Mr. Neeraj Dubey, partner from Juriscorp, who has got substantial experience in advising clients across various segments, rich experience in e-commerce, new age startup, and online platforms. So we wanted to give it a flavor from the legal perspective also. So happy to have you here today, Neeraj. Welcome. With that, a big hand applause to all these. So I'm very happy that my role is today only for asking questions, not to answer this. And with this set of people over there, I don't think if I would have been able to add any value on this. So what I would like to start with, basically, I don't think there is any debate about do we need digitalization or not. That is all well settled, established, and very clearly spelled out by Dr. Deepak Kumar also, that that is the way forward. There's no question, nothing about that. So first, to set the ball rolling, Sanjay, if you permit, I would like to start with you. My first thing is basically you have been involved in this process at various levels through different channels, ICICI, and along with you, along with Axis Bank and SBI, have been involved in the discussions at Ministry of Commerce, and have also undertaken some proof of concept transactions for complete digitization, what we call end-to-end digitizations, and also in your role as Vice Chair for ICC India Trade Digitization Working Group. And I think it's sometimes, I can't stop here, Pradhan, looking at the feed you had given when Mr. Shastri said that bio has to be small. There's one more thing I have to add for Sanjay, that he's also co-promoter for IBBIC in his capacity as ICICI banker. So Sanjay, how do you see from bank's perspective, how are you seeing the progress being made in the digitalization of trade in India? If you look at, what's your take on that?
I look at it from three lenses. One is enabling client to originate trade transactions through digital channels, whether it is banks internally developed interfaces or internally developed portals through which a client can log into and initiate the transaction which shall be processed by the bank. Many of such developments and many banks have developed such kind of solutions for client to interact with bank digitally. Second aspect, what we are looking at, that is recently, the technologically advanced companies, they are looking at integration through their ERP in getting those transactions originated from their ERP directly coming to the bank domain. That is using API services or even as some of the other SFTP protocols. And also recently what we have seen is using the third-party channels like Corporate Swift, like Bolero. So a lot of interest from the corporate side on doing business with the bank in a digital way has significantly increased. Second aspect of the digitization, what I look at is banks deploying digital tools for transaction processing, screening in their own environment, like deploying some robotics, deploying some data analytical tools, deploying something new which I have also learned recently, using NLP, using the written document to process that through screening, scrutinizing, and then transaction processing. And what Deepak Kumar sir has just told, fourth revolution. We all are working individually or collectively in helping connect clients to the counterparty or peer network so that their trade transactions go to another workflow which is not in the bank's domain but in another domain. That is through digital exchange of documents. From that perspective, I will stop here and say that a number of progresses have been made and a number of POC or pilots are going on currently.
Vivek, how do you see that entire universe, especially digitalization universe, what Sanjay has already mentioned? Anything about that?
No, sure. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Now, this is very interesting. If I think back, I was on a similar panel in Singapore talking trade digitization about 5 years back. So in some ways, we've made progress, but it also feels that we have not made progress because we are still, after so many years, still talking about the same thing. It's almost like, is letter of credit going to survive the next 5 years? That's the perennial question which is asked to us trade bankers. But having said that, I sort of agree with all what Sanjay has mentioned, that there are different layers to how you would look at digitization in the trade environment. And in addition to, let's say, how a bank would sort of interact with the corporates, one very important part of digitization of the trade ecosystem is really what are the corporates looking at in terms of digitizing their flows internally. In some ways, the interaction between a corporate to a bank and what a bank does with a transaction is really the last leg of the cycle of a trade transaction for a corporate. What's important is for also corporates to adopt, and they are adopting different fintech solutions or different proprietary solutions for digitizing their internal workflows. And that is where in some ways there are a lot of solutions out there, and with the boom in the last few years around fintechs, especially on every fintech or the different fintechs of different shapes and sizes is promising to solve some problem or the other, and rightly so. It's not as if it's just all talk. People are looking at leveraging technology to solve different business problems. Now, the challenge we have is how does a corporate look at adopting which is best fit for them, and B, then how do we ensure that those different technologies then finally come together as one to give a seamless end-to-end solution. So there are two parts to it, the way I look at it. One is how a corporate interacts with the bank, and expanding that lens also to include what is a corporate doing within their own ecosystem or own environment, which includes interacting with different sort of stakeholders to digitize their internal workflows.
Thank you. I think you have just added on to what Sanjay was saying, that there are different pieces. What we need to look at, how do we make everything work together in a seamless. Rajiv, would you like to add something in that?
Yeah. So, just to add to what Sanjay and Vivek mentioned, right? I think the way I look at it from a corporate's perspective, right? What the pandemic has done is really accelerate the pace at which trade digitization has seen its journey in India, right? I mean, just to give an example, clients used to probably be happy managing paper-based transactions, right? And that probably, if we go to a corporate client, the adoption rate would be like 20-30% of all the internal processes that they do on trade side. The pandemic has really taken that up to probably 70-75%, right? So we have achieved in the last 18 months what would have probably traditionally taken us 4 or 5 years to move to the digitization journey, right? Things like trade loans, onboarding of suppliers across vendor financing and other programs, AML tools, all the digital fintechs that Vivek spoke about that have come up across receivables and the payable financing and all that, right? And that is a real big journey that we have achieved, and there is more to do. And the reason I say there is more to do is what we're talking about is the end-to-end digitization, right? And not just digitization within the client space or within the bank space. So just to give some numbers, ICC's report says that close to of the $28 trillion of global trade that we do, less than 1% is completely end-to-end digitized, right? So we still have a very long journey to go in trade digitization. Just to again give some more perspectives, right? I mean, in a normal trade transaction globally, there are at least like 30 plus documents that are involved, and there are like 200 plus copies that are generated for every trade transaction across, right? So we're talking of a lot of amount of paper that still needs to be digitized.
So whatever we were thinking that we have made some progress in the COVID, etc. After listening to your numbers, looks like that we haven't even taken the first step on that.
Absolutely.
So at this stage, Shriri, I would like to just come to you. You have been very closely associated with the development of the digitization process or ecosystem in India. What I'm hearing over here is that there are different aspects to it. One is the banker's perspective, then the corporate has to do something, then maybe the other agencies also. Each one is working in their own space. And recently, you have been instrumental in driving one such platform, secured logistic document exchange. What is your think that, do you think that you have somehow put all the elements together, or still we are living in that fragmented technology landscape? How is it going to be addressed?
So as a cargo exchange, we provide consulting services to the logistic companies, basically. So when we were providing the consulting services, we have found saying that there are multiple stakeholders in a when a trade happens. Where there are buyers, there are sellers, there are banks, importers, exporters, shipping lines, or the carriers, basically. And every two parties are connected. Like a bank is connected to a buyer or an exporter or an importer. Same way, another bank is connected to another party, and the exporters are connected to the shipping line. So there is no holistic picture where like all the parties are being connected together, so that we can actually drive the whole digitization. Right. So when we actually during the COVID time, the first wave of COVID time, the problem statement was given to us by Ministry of Shipping, saying that the documents are not moving, the trade is at a halt. So that's where when we, with the help of Ministry of Commerce, Logistic Division, and Asian Development Bank, we developed the secure logistic document exchange platform. We used blockchain as a trust to create the trust between all the parties. And also, we use the quantum computing to actually create a secure layer on top of it, actually. And once we have the end-to-end platform developed, we did two transactions. Maybe we did quite a POCs with more than 7 banks now, and more than 21 stakeholders across India, which includes like logistic service users, providers, also like international banks, like. And then we try to like find out saying that where are the gaps actually? How do we actually do an end-to-end transaction? And we are quite successful. The industry was responding post-COVID saying that, yeah, we need this kind of platform, and how do we actually take it forward from there?
Okay, that sounds promising. Let's cross check that with Vivek. Vivek, you are the fintech background. You understand all these things pretty well, and I must say that you have recently concluded one transaction on SLDE platform also. And with that kind of thing, I must say that in India, when we look at the IT infrastructure or that ecosystem over here, for the payment, etc., we are well evolved. For domestic trade also, I'll say we have got all the elements in place. But when it comes to the cross-border, and especially in light of the experience which you have got recently handling that SLDE transaction, how do you see, where do we stand?
Sure. I'll talk about the SLD transaction which we did in the domestic sphere. So that was a live transaction. It moved beyond a POC where we actually had ArcelorMittal on one side and Lalit Pipes, two of our clients, who actually sort of issued a live letter of credit on the platform. Documents were presented digitally, and acceptance and the entire end-to-end cycle of the transaction was concluded on the platform within a few hours. And that sort of that's real life experience of a live transaction. Compare that to typical letter of credit transaction which happens in the physical form, where documents are presented to a bank, they travel to the issuing bank, there's an acceptance which is given which takes a few days, and if you're lucky it gets done within 7 days. That's the best case scenario in a sense. And the big driver, and why I believe this is going to be a very, very powerful platform, is it cuts down the financing cycle. And let's be honest here, what is driving most of the decisions for corporates is really how fast you can access financing. And here, if you're able to negotiate a letter of credit within a couple of hours, that will be the big driver of adoption, because you're really helping corporates optimize the working capital. Now, there are a number of platforms or technologies which sort of promise the same. If you look at even globally, there are platforms who are trying to achieve the same on a cross-border transaction. But given the fact that SLD has been promoted by the government and Ministry of Logistics and So that is where the adoption will be exponential. And that I think is a prerequisite for SLD to succeed, that it needs to have that continued blessing of the government. And in some ways, uh, that adoption will get forced into the ecosystem also. So to answer your question, SLD, I think from our experience, it was a fairly smooth experience. It needs to go commercial. It needs to, add on certain features in terms of ability to uh, handle native documents, which I know it does. Where instead of it has a flexibility to handle both image documents as well as digitally native documents, and that I think is important, because unless in an European world, every document will be digitally native and everything gets presented digitally, but that doesn't happen. So if you've got 10 ecosystem partners, there'll be some documents which will be images, there'll be some documents which will be digitally native, which will be created. So any platform should have the flexibility to handle all different types of documents also.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that's the right actually. So SLD has the flexibility to actually access both digital and as well as the native format of the document. And the entire flow will be like every user, it will be like simple, like an email box. Instead of like we are putting documents in a courier, we are actually creating a digital packet and putting all the documents in the packet, and then we are sharing it with the different stakeholders. And it actually creates the trust with the title of ownership has been written, who is the current owner of what document at what time. And also it creates the authenticity because all the stakeholders will be on the platform, and we know saying that from where the document has initiated. Even if it is digital or native, we know saying that who has started the initiation and how the document has moved. So complete end-to-end visibility will be there. It's not that a bank is giving a visibility to the exporter and exporter doesn't have a visibility after it has gone to the advising bank. Even he will be able to see saying that right now the entire packet is lying with the advising bank and he knows how to, he doesn't need to bug every time is issuing bank saying that I need the status of documents.
Okay, that sounds quite interesting. And one more point which Vivek you brought in, I think, and Srihari also mentioned, that this takes care of, system is capable of handling all kind of documents, because it's not possible straight away overnight to move from analog to total digitized. We have to have the intermediate PDF versions and all that. That also system is able to capable of handling that. So that's interesting. So coming back again, yeah, please.
I just want to add one thing. Vivek told that the time crunch happened, the entire financing happened within 7 days. I'm just giving one of the instance, very interesting instance. We have our own blockchain-based LC model, wherein if the clients, the applicants as well as beneficiaries, both are bank's client, they can do a transaction starting from LC issuance request till the bill acceptance and payment. One of the large clients who wanted to bring down and cut down their working capital cycle, they ensured that their distributors come on the platform to conduct the transaction through letter of credit. No sooner the supply happened under the letter of credit and supplier, who was a large corporate, presented the bill. It was a site bill. It immediately got scrutinized. It was identified as credit compliant and paid instantly. Now the applicant got furious. Sir, UCP says 5 working days, but you process the payment on fly. We said that UCP says gives 5 working days to communicate any discrepancies. And if we have an ability to process the document, it was processed on the same day and it got paid. That is the strength of the connected enterprise solution which is made available. Sorry to.
No, so it cuts both ways. it helps somebody, maybe making the life difficult for another person. Somebody is playing on the league floats, somebody is playing on that borrowed time. So Sanjay, since you have stepped in, I'll come to you on one thing more. We talked about the fragmented technologies and digital islands. We are talking about SLD, since at the same time, I know you as well as Vivek and many other banks. There is also another company in India which has been jointly floated, IBBIC. So how is that different? Or are we trying to find solution both through SLD, IBBIC trying to address the same problem, or these two are different? So somewhere these need to converge.
Sir, just want to highlight that IBBIC is an associate. IBBIC is a company which is called Indian Banks Blockchain Infrastructure Company. It has got created with association from wherein private, public sector, foreign banks, they all came together to create that. Currently, there are 18 banks who are the investor banks there. Many more are trying to come in, for which the frameworks, etc., is getting worked. Why it was created? The major banks in the country realized that the solutions which are creating the delays or creating inefficiency in the trade transactions or creating issues related to fraud, etc., as well as how to, whether this DLT can take care of the paperless way of doing a transaction and a connected solution. So it was created to explore, develop, and demonstrate how the DLT can be used as a solution for many of such kind of issues. And also, while doing or working on those solutions, a standardized framework can be created, which all the banks or banking industry in the client in India can adopt. That is from the compliance perspective, from the AML CFT perspective, whether common standard can be created and the system through metadata itself will process the transaction and go to a next workflow. Similarly, the compliance part can also be automated if and DLT has that functionality. So why not create a system for exploring, developing, implementing, experiencing the technology for greater uses? So it is not limited. Obviously, while creating this, it got created only in May 2021. And all the 18 banks and various committees have got formed. They are working on frameworks, rule books, which all products they will be bringing in. And I think Vivek or Srihari has talked about slightly the different systems which has got created. Unless until that is integrated with the banking core banking system, will not create efficiency. It is not an efficient way of doing that. Bank will log into Bolero, client will log into Bolero and do the maker checker, then the flow will go to next level. That is not the way. So a standardized, having a uniform protocol, if such kind of system is built in India with the collaboration of all the banks, then the integration part would be smooth. Like I will give example for LC processing. ICICI Bank may be having 28 mandatory fields to capture in their core banking. Rajiv in JP Morgan, they will have a requirement of 22, but 4 additional ones. Similarly, Vivek in Axis Bank would be having 32. So why not create a common standard? We'll have a supervisory oversight over it and adopt that in the system to create standardized workflows and also the journey from the client side. With regard to compared with SLD, I think I will, once I have been asked this question earlier also, and I said that technologies never compete. They collaborate and create a mechanism to give efficiency in the whole leg of the transactions. I'm not sure some of the strong features of SLDE by the last mile connect. Maybe IBBIC will collaborate and with the standards which are day before yesterday, which has got rolled out, that is called toolkit. Whether that common harmonized standard will help connect with different platforms, different systems, client systems, that will create further efficiency. So everywhere there is a opportunity of collaboration. I think 9 months back, in one of the discussion with similar kind of large consortium in Singapore, when we were working on interoperability with them, trying to now the technology, there are technological challenges. I overheard them telling, oh, IBBIC, yes, they are my competitor. So I think Vivek highlighted, it will be a utopian kind of assumption that the whole world will go to one network, one platform. Similarly, for financial market infrastructure also, we are talking about how to integrate, how to use the interoperability so that the efficiencies, what we are looking at, can be achieved. It is never expected that CPMI or IOSCO will create a single market infrastructure. Similarly, I think I have addressed your question, sir.
I should say that's where the experience shows. You have addressed the question, but I'm still wondering. But I think your point is very valid on that. It's a collaborative effort, and maybe the market is big enough. When we are really struggling, trying to invent, various streams will work, and finally you pick up the best from each, and each one learns from each other. So I'll come to you back on that standardization, and you mentioned about that recently released toolkit also. But before that, let me go to Neeraj before he starts wondering why I've been called here. Neeraj, the question to you, we have talked about so many things, different streams working, efforts being made. Dr. Deepak Kumar also talked about that. Clear roadmap, lot of clarity on that. Still, as Rajiv mentioned, that despite the push by the COVID, we are hardly at 1% globally. In India also, I think the picture is not going to be any better. So what is stopping, especially from the legal and contractual challenges, what do you see, which is probably acting as a hurdle from your position, if you look at how the picture looks like?
So I think lawyers have received maximum number of questions with respect to this issue in the past 2.5 years. And the challenges that I see or we see is number one, the aspect of enforceability. Whether a paperless transaction, paperless document is enforceable or not. And if there is a doubt, people will hesitate to adopt that. That's one. Second is with respect to the evidentiary value. If the credibility of the document is challenged in the judicial process and is not accepted, the credibility is not accepted, then nobody would want to undergo or undertake that path. The third is whether the document meets the mandatory requirements prescribed by different authorities, like customs or GST taxation authorities, whether they meet that those requirements or not. And fourth would be whether they have the commercial negotiability authority, like bill of lading or other documents or not. So these are the 4 key concerns. Now, how to address them? The first is by way of legislation. The second is by private contracts. And third is by judicial interpretations. Now, in common law, judges have this ability or the power, I can say, that they can interpret and provide different meaning to the existing principles. So principles, they don't change, but the processes or the way to approach it changes. But that is subject to a matter going to court and judge have that in front of him and then applies to suit the context of changing requirements of market, business, and people. Second is the private contract. Like Sanjay ji talked about Bolero. So Bolero rule book, so these are private contracts wherein a user who signs agrees that whenever he's dealing with other users, they'll respect and honor and not challenge the legality of paperless transaction. So that is acceptable, but within that community, it does not have legal backing. So the third option comes is legislation. Now, legislation can be done by two ways. One is specific, one is general. When we say general, so Electronic Commerce Act, Electronic Transactions Act, different countries, they have adopted legislation to this effect. And the specific legislations, I would say, like the carriage by sea, carriage of documents by sea, Australian legislation, they amended it and they brought paperless transaction as an equivalent of bill of lading. So that was a specific amendment that they made in an existing legislation to do that. So this is the general from legal perspective, I would say, the issues and the possible solutions. With respect to accepting or having a paperless transactions, the other issues that I see from practical standpoint is to have a system which is acceptable to all, but it should be acceptable to all. Second, there are multiple players who need to be brought on one page. Regulators on one side, the commercial entities on one side, like importers, exporters, banks, insurers, CHS, and they all need to be brought on one page. The third is with respect to the existence of existing papers, processes in multiple jurisdictions, how to synchronize that and evolve a system which works for everybody. And fourth concern is, which is a major concern, which we have seen rising in the last 2.5 years, is the concern of safety of the documents, safeguard of the documents, and the potential of fraud that can be done in an online environment, digitized environment. So these are the key issues that I see.
I think legal enforceability, regulatory forbearance, so maybe the common understanding. And one point which Mo you mentioned about very clearly, that it has to be across jurisdiction, across geographies. Just one jurisdiction doing it may not be good enough. So if I may come to you, Rajiv, JP Morgan, I'm sure you're looking at different geographies. As ASEAN, you're looking after that. And I'm sure being global bank, you would have been involved in the discussion, similar discussions in other platform. If you compare what's happening elsewhere, what's happening in India, are we in sync? Are we lagging behind? Are we leading? Or we are moving in tangent? What does picture look like? Because ultimately, unless everything converges towards we doing something, is not going to be of any use, any help.
Yep. So I think if I look at, and I'll start with India first, and then I'll go to the global perspective and come back to India, right? So if you look at India, right, there have been a lot of digital initiatives, right? I mean, acceptance of global stuff like Bolero, ESS docs, in trade transactions. There have been EUCP being adopted across LC transactions. IDPMS, EDPMS has been a fabulous, work done by the regulators to kind of digitize the flow of cross-border trade transactions. You've seen TREGS as a great example of financing for MSMEs, and creating that kind of liquidity, which worked brilliantly during the pandemic. There is obviously work which is happening on blockchain, IBBC, the SLDE transaction structure. If you look at what's some of these are transactions where, or structures where we've seen great amount of adaptability because of regulation, like IDPMS, EDPMS. And, there are some where we have seen transactions, but kind of proof of concepts and uh, structures requiring to be evolved because of all the challenges that, that Neeraj spoke about. I think what is the more fundamental issue is to how do we create a globally accepted principle or standard, which then can disseminate down to each of the country geographies, both in terms of standards as well as law and adoption of that, right? And which is where I think I'll go back to where one of the ICC's work, which is happening on digital standards initiative, which was all the members of ICC came together to kind in 2020 to kind of form a digital standards initiative. And that's they've released a toolkit which kind of defines common standards across multiple counterparties who are participating in a trade transaction. And how do you look at all the aspects being documented, which can then be adapted by everybody, right? So I think that will add a lot of value as that gets disseminated down to each of the countries, geographies, as they do. The second thing that is happening is from a law perspective, right? We've seen UN kind of working on the model law for electronic transferable records, which again will add teeth to how you look at bills of exchange, e-invoices, warehouse receipts, and all of that. And then the last piece is the paper from a law perspective, which is the UK Banking Law Commission recently, again, in the end of last year, kind of put out a concept paper out, which is still to be accepted, but talking about, again, how do you change the law around some of these digital trade documents? And I'm sure as that gets accepted, because UK was as part of Commonwealth, a lot of countries adopted English law as the baseline for all their local laws. I think a lot of this will get disseminated down again to each of the countries. And I'm sure it's important how we adapt quickly to these things, which will then be able to ensure that we do a faster adaptation of all these, digital change. I mean, all the changes in laws and regulations, coming back to automating these trade transactions and adoption of digital flows.
Thank you. I think you mentioned about, Sanjay also had mentioned about that ICC DSI Digital Standard Initiative, and also the digitalization toolkit they have released only on 15th of March. But Neeraj, just I've come to you, but this is something, again, ICC is a recommendatory, where they clearly say that this is not a law, local law prevails over this. But you also mentioned about MLETR, and also about that electronic trade document discussion paper released by the UK Law Commission. Ultimately, that everything till the time it becomes legally enforceable, the point which you mentioned, which requires certain changes in the existing legal framework. And these initiatives over there, MLETR, which is by the United Nations, and also the digital trade, electronic trade documents working paper, discussion paper by UK law. How do you see, is it going to help expedite the process in countries like India, wider adoption across the globe? How is it from your perspective? How do you see? Because I think India, UK has got better connection, being a Commonwealth country. Our law is also based on the UK law. But is it universally going to be helpful?
So the MLETR, which was, I think, released in 2017, so far only 7 jurisdictions they have adopted it. The Bahrain was the first, and then Singapore in 2020 and 21. Then a lot of other jurisdictions, Abu Dhabi and Belize or Paraguay, they adopted it. But it's a very slow progression. But the model law is something that can, of course, address the issue that we talked about with respect to legal enforceability. Also, the draft paper, which is there in UK Council has released. So that also addresses the key aspects. And if we have a legislation in these lines in India, then it will, of course, address these situations. Why? These regulations, I'll tell you the common principles with what these laws have. Number one, since we are talking about international trade, right, and in a digital environment, first, they talk about what aspect, what documents would be considered or would be allowed in this paperless transaction, right? So they are setting the tone right from there. Second, they're talking about uh, technologically agnostic, which means all kinds of technology. They'll not favor one over the other. So all kinds of technologies will be allowed. So that's another wonderful thing. Third is with respect to the aspects of interoperability, right? So since you are technologically agnostic, so you'll allow that interoperability as well. Fourth is with respect to the enforceability of the documents, right? So there'll be legal force behind these documents, paperless documents, and they will be enforceable, which means it will have evidentiary value as well in court. So that is the fifth thing that it addresses. The last and most important aspect is cross-border enforceability. So it will have legal effect across the border as well, which means document executed in India or between India and Singapore will have enforceability in both the places, right? So this is one 5 key principles. The other thing is the I would say legal issue of ownership and possession. So digital assets, which we generally talk about, we talk about who owns it. The UK Commission paper, it talks about possession also. So the document, if it is in my possession, I am a lawyer, I may be acting on behalf of one of these banks, right? So I am in possession of that. I'm not the owner. Owner would be my client, right? So there are so many consultants, so many participants in a transaction, and they may be involved. So they would be the possessor of the document, but not the owner. Owner would be somebody else. The transferability. Now, onus, as in the blockchain, Srihari mentioned that there would be footprints. So who logged in at what point of time, which place. So there'll be logs. So who made changes in those documents. So they'll be clearly identified. So Neeraj has the control on the documents now. Once I close, the control goes to Sanjay ji. He will work on it. Then it will go to the third party. And that's how the transaction will be closed. So who is making what addition in the document is also very clearly identified, and onus or ownership can be identified accordingly.
Okay. Yeah.
I will add here one thing. Neeraj has explained in a very elaborative manner. One part is recognition of document in electronic form as if it is in a physical form. For enforceability purpose, also to demonstrate the ownership. When MLTR talked about technologically neutral environment, means they talked about the electronic transferable record management system. Who is using a specified tool has to satisfy the framework, minimum framework, which is functional equivalence of for creating a document in electronic form, for storing the document in electronic form, for transferring the document in electronic form, for presenting the document in electronic form, as well as burning the document at last to get it converted into physical, or after its life ceases to be. Even Singapore, one of the major trading hub who has adopted MLTR in their Electronic Transactions Act and recognized in respective specified laws, bill of exchange, warehouse receipt, and bill of lading in as an electronic document. But still, that framework and regulation around that framework is missing. I will give one example. It is still evolving. Like India has also adopted electronic communication in international contracts, rules of electronic signature. That is called in India digital signature. Can a document created and digitally signed in India is recognized in UK? Is there any interoperable framework through which UK resident can validate that that document is genuinely signed by the creator? That is still missing. Even I came to know through some of the papers I was going through. In 2021, controller of certifying authorities, they have laid out the standard framework under which the digital signature should appear. In India also, there are 8 certifying authorities. And the framework or the standard format in which they are using has differences. So adopting a law is one thing. Recognizing that document as a legal document and demonstrating the title over that by having a possession, but it has to meet certain technological standard, and for technological standard, there has to be a framework, and framework has to be created by a regulator, or there has to be a system through which accreditation has to be given. If it has someone has developed a solution in say Singapore. In one of the discussions last week only, we are trying to do a number of POCs to experience how a document which is created as per MLTR can be used by adopting those utilities, by incubating that in the systems. Then that gentleman said, since India has not adopted the MLTR, it will be better if you sign a NDA with jurisdiction of Singapore. I knew, but I didn't ask him question because it is evolving in nature. These utilities tools have only got created recently. A framework need to be tested. Accordingly, the regulators, even in ETA, Electronic Transaction Act amendment, which Singapore has done, there is a provision of creating accrediting agencies. There is a provision of Ministry of Commerce identifying a regulator to ensure that the technology and codes which are getting used during those 4 or 5 processes in the life of the electronic transferable document meets the requirement. ऐसा नहीं कि संजय कुमार ने भी एक बना दिया utility to create a bill of exchange and that is acceptable in UK, and later on someone finds कि भाई ये तो it is not meeting the functional equivalence, which is as per law a BOE should have. Then the title, the legal right, the obligations, claim, everything goes for toss. So obviously the framework regulator had to look at it so that not only it is recognized in a proper form in the local jurisdiction, but also acceptable across different jurisdictions.
I'll just add to it. So, of course, Singapore law is more inclusive and also instructive. The issues that I spoke before, so 3 issues with respect to the negotiable instruments, whether why they have been excluded from the purview of information technology. Then the issue with respect to the cyber security, and the issue with respect to the safeguard of documents. Now we have separate laws which addresses the cyber frauds, the IT Act, which addresses that concern. Then the data confidentiality, security with respect to that. Again, there are rules, SPDI rules under the IT Act, and there's a bill which is still pending. So the framework with respect to data confidentiality, again, that's another debate. The third aspect is with respect to the negotiable documents. So to give more effect to that. So this law can address those issues, those situations, and it can be more enabling, it can be more inclusive, so that then policies or other aspects can flow automatically from it. The way we see GST, the way it is inclusive, they have created a council, now council does. We don't have to wait for the budget for the changes to happen. So it has become a seamless aspect. Industry can approach the council and it can change anytime within the year, right? So it's a better way of coming up with a encompassing legislation which addresses all these issues that we have talked about.
So if I may simply try to summarize it, what you are saying is that this is a process of evolution. It has to go step by step, not a revolution, basically. So with that, Vivek, if I come to you on that, just because it's going to be a multi-step journey. There are so many things which have to move, and each one, if kept continues moving at its own pace, I don't know how long will it take. Do you think that this is something which can be left to the market to go at its own pace, or there is some kind of regulator or government intervention is required for this? Okay, this is to be done. This is how it's to be done. Something like that.
Sure. So, no, thanks for that. So, a couple of things here. So, when I was listening to the conversation for the last sort of 20 minutes, we've been talking about really digitally native documents and what will it take from a legal enforceability perspective to get to a digitally native document which is acceptable globally. Now, that to my mind, in some ways, is the holy grail, and that's like going to the absolute extreme where if we get there, that's the best thing that can happen. The way I would look at it is to solve our immediate problems as a short-term thing, or I wouldn't even call it short-term. The immediate problem which we are facing is really how do you handle the information which is contained for that transaction. So I'm making a distinction between the information of a transaction versus the legal ownership of the underlying documents not even going down to uh, digitally native documents, just handling information in a standard protocol with all the standards and ensuring that all the information is there in available in one place, or there are set standards for banks to, or not just banks, for all the ecosystem partners to exchange. And that is where I think, going back to the question which you asked, can that be left to the markets to evolve a standard and a solution, or should that be a little more driven by a regulator? I'm firmly in the camp that it needs to be driven a little bit more from a regulatory perspective, because left to markets to adopt a standard, it'll all become bilateral contracts. And we've seen the case of Bolero, and picking up on Bolero, or EUCP has been around for the longest time, but it's not really taken off. At the end of the day, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Unless the market adopts it, what's the point of having a fantastic regulatory sort of framework, etc.? So to that extent, I think if there is a little bit of regulatory push that this is the way the market or the participants need to sort of go about settling a transaction or handling a transaction, that is what will spur adoption. So just to give a small example, I think Dr. you mentioned in your speech about EDPMS. Now, for a bank, and I'm giving a very real example, for a bank to process an export transaction, we will take data from EDPMS, which will have 10 pieces of information. For the balance 2 or 3 pieces of information which are required to be done from a sanctions check perspective, etc., I need that piece of paper. Now, that defeats the very purpose of trying to do something digitally. If those 2-3 pieces of information can be mandatorily put on the same platform, or even if it's a different platform, but I, as a bank, am able to extract that information, and that is considered as a true source of information or an authentic source of information, that enables me and the corporate to offer a digital end-to-end experience. So while on one hand, having a digitally native document is great, but even if you can get to a position where the information is digitally transmitted and is secure and is exchanged in a standardized format, that itself will solve a lot of problems. And that, I think, needs a little bit of a regulatory push, if I can be pretty direct about it.
Thank you. Sanjay, Rajiv, would you like to add quickly something, or simply, yes, I agree with this?
Yeah, in fact, what Vivek has just highlighted, I think 3 years back, under Aswini sir's initiative only, means ki Fedai initiative, we have done a whole hog of exercise by sitting along with key banks who have significant exposure in export and import, and derived at data points which are available in iSkate, or which can be added, tweaked to make available in EDPMS and IDPMS to take the client's export and import journey entirely digital. So we identified, I think, in IDPMS 11 data points and in EDPMS 13 data points, which were mostly what Vivek has highlighted. It is related to HSN code and shipment details, so that the entire process in the bank can be digitized, and client, neither they require any paper to submit to us, nor I am bothered to safe keep those papers. So the entire journey should be digital. And
Okay, Chatham House rules applies. Please go ahead.
in one of the article I was reading, in external trade, at any given point of time, there are 4 billion documents moving in the system. And thereafter I got confused. Therefore, I did a Google to recheck if 1000 meter is equal to 1 kilometer or something else. It was showing that if those documents are kept one over each, it goes up to 520 kilometer. That is only at any given point of time. And it has a direct impact on 500,000 trees. So Ashwini sir asked me in what form and manner all the stakeholders should engage. Main bola, being a corporate citizen, being a responsible citizen, it is everyone's responsibility to cut down the paper in international trade. Because paper is a source of not only cost, but also delay, inefficiency, fraud, and last but most important thing, climate impact. So there is no alternative but to cut down the paper. Whatever is required collectively, we need to do it. And digital adoption, I think Rajiv has shared during the last 1.5 years, even in corporate world, that also on trade, it has moved from 30% to 70%. That is an indication. And I think I have not addressed that question. What is client thinking about? The solutions which we have provided so far, now clients in telling, "Hey boss, you have brought blockchain in domestic trade, brought in so many options available to us to communicate and transact with you digitally. What about my external trade? How I can transact digitally in a comfortable way? At the same time, we should be comfortable that my rights, obligations remains intact while digitally. And just to add, we are taking that blockchain solution to overseas center also. But we would have thought of taking that solution through creating an interoperability with global platforms and networks. We were preferring that because there the more people are on those platforms, so that my client, if dealing with hundreds of corporates in those locations, they will be able to do it digitally. So it is in the interest of the government, regulator, all corporate citizens, that a pressure should be built on those creators of the islands to also create a utility for interoperability, to getting people connected with other platforms or networks. And I will appreciate a thing recently what has happened in one of the POC, RBI for retail remittances. They have got the UPI and Pay Now connected for seamless remittances from India to Singapore and Singapore to India. On the similar line, what MAS has done, MAS has done with the Bank of Thailand. And last week, the technology provider who has facilitated this POC for Pay Now and UPI, they came and showed us what is that solution. They have offered that solution for faster payment systems to get integrated with cloud-based applications. So trade scenes and payments have always been digital. I think Deepak Kumar sir has said on showing the SWIFT. But a trade, everyone has to come and support a digitalization, not a digitization.
No, I think the point you mentioned about the sensitivity to the environment, climate control, I got unnecessarily scared. I thought I was not sure what are you going to say on that. So there we don't need to apply the Chatham House, that everybody genuinely needs to be concerned with that and we all take care. So just to, I think we have already run beyond our scheduled time. Initially we were wondering 1 ghanta kya hoga baat usme, but it's gone beyond time. So just quickly, one last point, if I ask you, what would you like to wish from regulator or government to be done to expedite, to make that process smoother and quicker? Just maybe starting with you, Vivek, if you can.
Putting on the spot. So if, going back to what Dr. Subramanian said in the morning, principles-based supervision, and that's where even in trade today, all the regulations are very, very prescriptive. So if the prescriptive regulations can be aligned to more principles-based, that would be my one ask.
I will say I'll have to ask. One is like, we need the support from the government and regulator to enforce or to get more adoption by all the stakeholders across India and the globe. Every importer, exporter, everybody should be able to announce it. We already have done workshops with the Ministry of Railways, PO, other associations also. But if government can push this down to all the stakeholders, it will be more beneficial for the trade. And second one is like, as in this particular scenario, it cannot be 100%. There may be a scenario where somebody wants his digital document to be converted to a physical document, or a physical document to be converted to a digital document, the remat and demat services. Maybe one of the agencies should be able to handle that, so that problem is also resolved. That should not be a roadblock tomorrow saying that, okay, this country doesn't accept digital document, and we are all like having 75% done, and then we cannot move from there actually. So that remat and demat portion also be done. From a technology side, it is a simple thing, we can develop that, but some agency has to hold it actually.
I'll ask for the simple thing, a comprehensive legislation.
I think I have already spoken. There is a need of everyone to sit together, identify the areas, build those enablers so that we achieve what we want to achieve.
Yeah, I'll end with the fact that obviously, all these things that we built, how do we kind of bring interoperability between all of them together, right? How do we do that quickly and fast so that, all these systems kind of do that, right? And I was really impressed by Dr. Deepak Kumar's vision for IDPMS, EDPMS, right? How quickly we can see that as a journey, right? I think that will also expedite what we do on cross-border trade, specifically adding financing and all the other elements, right? That would kind of really be a great tool to kind of bring all the aspects around cross-border trade on a single platform, and then linking all the other digital islands that we said to that central platform. could potentially mean, the brilliant work that's been done on something like a central organization like NPCI, for example, right, for trade, who can then probably control all the ecosystems under one umbrella, potentially, right, and driven by regulation, because, as an example, right, 24/7 money movement was something that we would thought would take ages, right? But it's now very live and running, right? IMPS, who would have thought you would have got money in like 2 seconds after the remittances happened, but it's now live. So I think it's all about how do we kind of bring all these intent down into action, and and how quicker we can do that, and potentially something like a central organization could be the way to think of, right, driven from the Reserve Bank of India regulations and kind of authority.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Before we open up for Q&A, if people still have got the patience left, we'll wait for that. I will just try to summarize. I think there are immense benefits in going for it. I don't think doing nothing is an option at all right now with us. Digitalization, the way I look at it, is the only way to future-proof our business, especially when we are looking at 1 trillion international, 1 trillion export, 5 trillion economy, etc. All that needs to be done. The two key challenges which emerge from this discussion also are the lack of coherent standards and legal uncertainty, besides other things which are there which need to be taken care of. And I think we need to promote standardization, work on regulatory and legal amendments to overcome these problems. And this has to be a collaborative effort. I think it has to be collaborative. It can't be just one-sided push, with active involvement of regulator and all other stakeholders. With this, I'll just stop here. Maybe if you have got, anybody has got question, we have got few minutes, I think we can take, if there are any. So we can take it. Yes.
Yeah, it's not a question, but based on discussion, very interesting discussion, lot of insights and for the moving forward. And what Vivek has said nicely, that it's not the complete thing. It will take time and depends. A lot of dependencies are there. If we go for legality of the document, at least digitize the data, start with. And there's small point, like as you have done, I think in 19 or somewhere 2-3 years earlier, the additional field from IDPMS and ADPMS, that I promise we'll try to do it at the earliest. And how to onboard other 6-7 points what we have in there. And there, as I said, that buying, we want a committee and contributor thinkers from the industry. And here we are seeing the panel. We'll be in touch with Fedai to get the right people. And we'll try to achieve this. At least we can set target for this year. And this is right moment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So if there are no questions, maybe once again, thank you all. And can we get that the bowl for the lucky draw? Okay, we start with Rajiv. Abhishek from DBS.
Abhishek from DBS.
Sir. Yes, everyone.
Nagarajan, Kotak.
Arun not there. He not only misses the opportunity, but he'll be penalized for this.
Chaitanya Joshi, IDFC First.
Oh, good. Welcome this. Viresh Kumar, SBI. You have to give it to him. बस एक काफी है. Mr. P. Mahadevan, Central Bank of India. And Mr. Ajit Kumar, DCB. DCB Bank, Mr. Ajit Kumar Singh. No. Venkatesh C, Karur Vyasya Bank. It pays to be there in the post-lunch session. No? Yeah, he's there. Venkatesh is coming. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. And now I'll request our sponsors, Refinitiv, to come over and take over. They will be having a lucky draw too. So can we have Refinitiv representatives here? Mike, यहाँ पे है. You can do whatever you want. It's all yours.
Subrat De, ICICI Bank. She's getting the. Thank you. Thank you. Patrick from QNB. B. Arun Kumar, Canara Bank. Yogesh from IndusInd Bank. Ajit Kumar Singh from DCB. Deepak Agarwal, SBM. Arvind from Bandhan Bank. Thank you.
So right, and now to do the final honors, I would request Mr. Madhur Agarwal, Vice Chairman, Fedai, to propose a vote of thanks.
Dr. Deepak Kumar, ED, RBI, Mr. Saurabh Nath, Mr. Manoranjan Padhi, and other dignitaries from the Reserve Bank of India, Mr. H.K. Jaina, MD, CCIL, Mr. S.V. Shastri, DMD, SBI, and Chairman, FEMDA, Mr. Rajesh Sinha, Chairman, Fedai, fellow bankers and delegates for this conference. I feel really privileged to be here, been given the opportunity to thank everyone who's put in a lot of hard work to make this conference happen. In January this year, when Mr. Ashwin Sindwani first asked me that should we have our annual conference this year, I said, yeah, it would be a good idea. Let's do sometime June, July. Things should be better by then. And then he told me, oh no, I'm planning something in March. So I was not sure that it can happen, but great work by him and his team to make this happen. I'd like to thank all our speakers today. The wonderful insights they have given. I had a very enriching experience, and I'm sure everybody would agree with me on that. I'd like to thank our speakers, Mr. H.K. Jaina, Mr. Shastri, Mr. Rajesh Sinha, Mr. R. Subramanian, and Dr. Deepak. Thanks a lot for taking time out and taking us through that. We really had good learnings about two contemporary topics, both in terms of integration of Indian financial markets with international markets, as also the digitization of trade. And I'd like to thank all the panelists in the two panels. They had to take a lot of time to prepare for this, and we had really good insights with them here. I'll also like to thank our sponsors here, CCIL, Refinitiv, and BSC for making this event happen. I'd like to thank the event management team, Blue Bells, and Ambi Valley team as well for making this a very hospitable event. Last, but I would say most important, I'd like to thank the entire Fedai team, all the hard work they have put in to make this is a smooth experience, because usually when people are working behind, anything goes wrong, we remember them, things go smooth, that's taken as granted. So I'll request a round of applause for the entire Fedai team to make this happen. And thanks all the delegates for coming here. Without all of you, this would not have happened. We were initially targeting around 100 members, but we finally had 125 delegates. So thanks a lot to all of you for making this happen. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Madhur Agarwal, for that vote of thanks. And now there's tea in the hall, tea and coffee and cookies. And we'll have a gala dinner at 8 o'clock again here. So please, please come for the gala dinner. Thank you very much.